it's important to be practical, but it's also important to build your strategic plans and look towards what's next with optimism, because you will stifle yourself in your organization and you will defeat yourself before you get started if you don't incorporate optimism into what you're building and what you're doing. Accept where you're at and craft a plan to move forward. And as an entrepreneur, I think it's super important. And this applies a lot to the small business owners for Chick-fil-A as well. There's so many hats that you have to wear when you run a small business. And if you're a small department for a people leader, there's a lot of HR departments of one or a few. It still astounds me to this day how many companies there are that are big companies that have relatively small people departments. And that means that those individuals have to wear a lot of hats. And some days that's tough. And so how do you deal with where I'm at and then take that lens of optimism and say, what does a solution look like that's going to solve this and propel me toward tomorrow, towards whatever's in the future? And so it's important to pair those two things together, because if everything is only optimism and there's no practicality with it, you're going to be lopsided. And great choices and great leadership is about balance.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of our HR Heroes podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have Amanda Carrin here today. And it's easy for me to say, but I know we're going to talk about this a little bit on the podcast, but you come from an organization that wants to be the most caring organization in the world. And I'm super excited to be able to talk about, your experience in leading people and culture at Chick-fil-A. And we're going to kind of talk about kind of your ascension in the HR world, but also what it means to be a part of an organization that has such a huge impact in the community and making people feel seen, heard, and validated when they come to your organization. So Amanda, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited for you to be here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
So Amanda, I'd like to be able to ask a question as we kind of get things started here today. How is your heart doing today?
Oh my goodness. Hopeful. I think that every day should be a decision to start with joy. And so I try to wake up with a fresh perspective and make the decision to move forward with gratitude. So I feel hopeful about each day. So today's a good day. What about your heart?
My heart is really full today because I'm here able to talk to another amazing leader like you, but I want to kind of double click on that. So you said when you wake up in the morning, you make a decision to lead with joy. I love that sense of accountability to kind of control our environment. How did you kind of stumble across, or why is that emphasis of starting your day with joy so important to you?
For me, honestly, it started as a child with the parents that I had. My parents were always very intentional about driving ownership of one's decisions. When I was a kid, it infuriated me, but I understand it now as an adult. My dad used to have this rule, basically, that if you wanted to come to him, he was a Texas businessman. So he was a straight shooter and a salesman, and he had great advice and he was a good listener, but he required ownership. And so from a very young age, if I wanted to come to him and complain or ask for his opinion on a situation of some kind that was going on, whether it was in my household with my sister or, with my friends or my jobs when I was young, he made me go to the mirror in our split level house. And I had to evaluate what's my ownership in this, whatever this was. And so I had to be able to come down and when I sat in front of him, say, hey, here's what I own. Here's my piece of this. And then once I could do that, he would help me troubleshoot and look through how to solve the other problems. So that decision of ownership of what kind of attitude are you going to have, how are you going to approach a problem or a situation started from a really young age.
I am absolutely infatuated with this idea because I talk about the sense of accountability a lot. And it seems like today in society, it's very easy for us to be able to point the finger at others, but we ignore the three fingers that are pointed back at us. So why don't you kind of talk about maybe why do you think it's so difficult for people to take accountability and ownership for their situation when it's so much easier to kind of cast blame and cast power away in a lot of situations we come across in life?
I think a piece of it is human nature in the sense that we're driven or pulled toward what's comfortable, and accountability is inherently uncomfortable. So whether it's the way that we set up our homes, the type of education or jobs that we pursue, the way we spend our free time, that's built around seeking comfort. And so the best thing that a person can do when they want to increase their comfort with accountability is increasing their comfort with being uncomfortable. And I know that's a kind of a weird sentence to say, but that's
Beautiful.
Human nature to seek what's comfortable. And so that's probably the biggest challenge of why society struggles with it. And when we start to create language of why it's okay to be uncomfortable, what we learn when we're uncomfortable, how we grow when we're uncomfortable, you start to open up all these doors of opportunity and joy through experiences. But you have to be comfortable with ownership and being uncomfortable first.
What's an experience where you've been incredibly uncomfortable, but it led to bigger opportunities?
I had the CEO that I work for right now had a conversation with me a few years ago, and this was before I was promoted to CPO, and he led in with a lot of really nice things, so he had good balance entered into that conversation. But he said, "I need two primary things from you," and they were two things that I had been particularly proud of, but I hadn't viewed them from the lens of another individual in the way that I needed to. And he told me, this is one of your opportunities. And for example, one of those things was, he said, you talk like an attorney, and you have to do a better job of knowing your audience and connecting in a way that people can feel like they see themselves in you, because it will create more depth in your relationship. And for me, I always thought, when you speak with that knowledge and that firm foundation and that confidence, people will appreciate that. And it's not that they don't, it's just that they can't connect to it sometimes as easily. So for me, having those uncomfortable moments have been key in my growth. Another thing that I've done as a leader is I heavily incorporate, you might have heard of Giant, which is a leadership development platform that's global. And one of the things that they talk about is support challenge. And the concept isn't new, it's just how you choose to administer it in your organization or with your team. But when you have meetings with your team and you invest that one-on-one time with them, you have to maximize it and give them a chance to share with you where they could use a little bit more support, and give them permission to challenge you a little bit. And you do that with them, because that's where real growth and connection come from in an organization. So for me, I think sitting in those one-on-ones, you don't always hear that you're at a 10 out of 10 on how you're leading your team, and you have to be open to being uncomfortable and listening to that feedback so you can grow.
One of the things that I love in our previous discussion, I believe I busted out a book that's on my shelf back here. It's Gary Vaynerchuk's 12 and a half. It's the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. And you might say, why is it 12 and a half? Because the half ingredient that he's still working on is kind candor. Because when we
Mm-hmm.
have candorous conversations with people, it's very scary because we think confrontation is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But what he's trying to do is develop that skill set of having a kind, candorous conversation to get the most out of people. So, how do you kind of emphasize, I would say, that use of kind candor in some of those tough conversations you have to have, not only with your team members, but also with yourself sometimes, to realize what you can do better to serve your team better?
I think that what's really important is the baseline of what every organization needs to be built on, which is trust. And you have more freedom to apply those types of principles when you set that foundation of trust for your team. So for me, that starts with clear expectations, and I want them to know what I'm going to expect of them. And I want to know what they expect of me as their leader. And so I think that setting that foundation provides the platform for what that candor needs to look like, because it really can be authentic. Oftentimes, because of that conflict avoidance that people have, there's pieces of truth and authenticity in what they share, but they don't really trust that that'll be safe when they share it. They don't really trust that anything will happen when they share what they need. And so you don't get that full experience. So I try to set the baseline when people join my team of what type of leader I am, and I want to listen to them and what they need as well, so that there's a place for that constructive conflict. That's the other thing that I have found, is that you get people from all different walks of life. And so sometimes the assumption is that people are going to understand what constructive conflict is. And a lot of times people aren't familiar with that language. They aren't in a place where they've experienced constructive conflict conversations, and they've only experienced something that's been destructive. So helping them understand, hey, these are the types of conversations we have on this team and with one another, creates that foundation of trust. And then moving on what you hear also reinforces that, so that it can continue to occur.
Isn't it interesting how we all have those different life experiences where we look at things like conflict as being either super divisive or things that kind of help us get past the moment so we can become closer and more congealed? I think
Hmm.
it's just so interesting that we have to consistently learn things as we're adults because some of us come from, family environments where conflict was a loud, abrasive, scary thing. And it was something that was constant. So we pull away from it. And it's so interesting to me that we have to be lifelong learners on how we can communicate better as humans with one another to kind of accomplish our goals. That's just such an interesting concept to me.
Absolutely. It's the beauty and the challenge of life. And if you go into situations with a learning mentality, you're going to have a lot more unique experiences and a lot more growth. One of my favorite books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a classic. It's an oldie, Stephen Covey. If you or your listeners haven't read it, I would encourage you to. There's a lot of great nuggets in there, but one of those is seeking first to understand and then to be understood. And I think when you seek to understand people, these lights come on in their sort of the house of who they are. And when the lights start to come on, you see all these things that before you couldn't see them. So understanding people and their background, where they come from, how they communicate, what type of individual they are, because everyone is very diverse. Those are all ingredients to the recipe of your team. And so really seeking to understand and know them rather than just sort of have a blanket approach to everything will help maximize what your team can do.
I heard a perfect example of this leadership style and this humanistic leadership style. Deion Sanders was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and he was
I thought
talking
that was an
about
interesting
with
podcast.
the host. Yeah, did you listen to it?
I didn't, but I love him and he's a dynamic speaker, so I'm interested to hear what he said.
Yeah, so he was talking about the question came from the host. They said, how do you motivate different players? Because not everybody's motivated the same way. And what he said is, I have to spend enough time around my guys to realize what type of conversations I need to have with them to get them motivated and light that fire within them. Sometimes I can yell at a player because that's how they get motivated. They don't take it personally. They know I'm their coach. Other people I have to have a stern conversation with. Other people I have to have a conversation with in public or in private. But some people I just have to give a look to and they understand what I mean. And that's how I get them motivated. And I thought that that was such a great way of kind of tying back in the idea of turning all the lights on in the house to recognize who this person is and how you can truly motivate them.
Absolutely.
Because we're talking about getting the most out of our team, this is a perfect segue into the question that came from our previous guest. Now,
Okay.
this individual is named Mark Brown, and he's from Oswego Health in New York. And he wanted to ask, what are you doing as an organization to build the next generation of talent?
Generation's a powerful word, isn't it? I think Chick-fil-A has a really good reach into that because we are a generational company. There's so many different ages and backgrounds that come through us, and the organization is heavily invested in development. And if you read research, you know that people want to know that there's a place for them and they want to know how to get there. And discovering what it is that the ambitions are within the different layers of people in your organization will help you determine how best to develop them. So for our organization, determining where everybody's at and identifying the best way to get there is the first step for us. And the cool thing about Chick-fil-A is that it is primarily franchised owned. And so you have over 2,500 stores globally, and there are different operators for most of them. And that's very intentional in how the company sets it up because it allows that connection in a way that a lot of the large companies with mass franchises under one holding may not get that connection and understanding. And when you do that, each franchise gets to build their sort of best practices for how they want to develop their team. And, Big Chick-fil-A gives a lot of great guidance. They have a lot of great resources, but each owner gets to customize that for their team. And so when you're looking under the umbrella of seeing your people and getting to know them and creating a path for them across the generations of your team, Chick-fil-A is very empowering by giving that decision making authority to the boots on the ground, the people that are working with their teams. Because each community is different and each section of that community within the store is different. So it really helps to empower those leaders that are in those franchises to be able to make those decisions.
I feel like it's so powerful to kind of think about the organization that has global reach that is Chick-fil-A, because you guys are located in so many different micro cultures. When I was recently in Hawaii, a Chick-fil-A opened up on Oahu. And the culture of the Hawaiian people in that Oahu culture is completely different. But one of the things that I saw was the people who were representing the brand also represented the values of Chick-fil-A. So
Mhm.
how do you kind of think about the overarching values of the organization and why you guys have been so successful at kind of, showing that your employees are showing up underneath the same, I would say, flag of Chick-fil-A, but they continue to embody the same values, which kind of creates that amazing experience for everybody across the sector of if you're in Hawaii or if you're in South Florida or wherever you're at, you're going to have an amazing experience.
Yeah, I love hearing you say that, and I'm so glad that you had a great experience. That is something so unique and really special about Chick-fil-A, and it really does start with the founder, Truett Cathy. A little over a week ago, the brand celebrated Founders Week, which is where we recognize Truett and what he stood for. And there's so many words that could be used to describe him, but I heard a leader the other day. I was in a meeting, and she was discussing their sort of the words that they drive home for their team when they want to make sure that they're clear on how we steward the brand. And I was super excited because I love roundtable discussions and hearing other leaders and how they motivate their team, what they do. And the two words that she shared were grit and gratitude. And that encapsulates the life of Truett. And if you ever want to learn about what the journey he went through and why that became a part of who he is, if you can tour his offices and hear his story at the support center in Atlanta. But that message of grit and gratitude was something that he continued to drive home through the end of his life, and the organization was built on that. And so that is cascaded all the way from the top to the bottom. And it's very rare to find an organization where there's such shared language. And truly, when someone joins Chick-fil-A, they really do feel like they become a steward of the brand. It's, one of my favorite movies is The Lord of the Rings. And when you look at those series, you hear them say the steward of Gondor, the great white city. And it sounds almost storybook like, because that's how it feels for us is we want to steward the brand. And being able to do that with grit and gratitude is what has led to that success. Overall, if you go to the Chick-fil-A website and you explore what their values are, there's a lot of words there that help you understand, but the takeaway in the short version is to care for our guests, to care for our team, and to care for our business. And we want to have that be that culture of care to be integrated into everything that we do, because that's how Truett operated. And it didn't matter whether he was creating a new product or placing a restaurant or crafting a franchise agreement, that culture of care was integrated into everything. And so it's really important for us to have that hospitality and that care shine, whether you're in New York or whether you're in Hawaii.
I mean, it's still amazing to kind of hear that there are stewards of the brand like you, Amanda, who are literally embodying that caring organization. I want to kind of take a couple seconds to dive into your HR hero past, because a lot of people honestly don't kind of indicate in fifth grade that we're going to be a people leader, but most of us say, I want to be an astronaut, as an example. So why don't we kind of talk about your process in finding your path in HR?
Yeah, I love that you said astronaut, because I actually did want to be an astronaut when I was little. And I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool to explore almost like Star Trek, the frontier that's unknown. And then I realized how much math you had to do. And I figured out that was not for me. And I needed to find a different way to be creative, and that they spent a lot less time in space than they did doing equations. So for me, it just kind of evolved. I knew that I always loved learning and I always loved business. And there's just something about the business world that is dynamic and always changing. And there's so many different avenues to explore and so many things that you can impact on all different levels. No matter who you are, you can make an impact. And so I knew that I wanted to go into business. And for my bachelor's degree, I focused on what was titled a leadership cognate, and it gave me a flavor of leadership in all the different traditional arms of a business administration degree. So you got to see what leadership was like in marketing and in operations management and in finance and in the people world. And that was where it first sort of opened up for me of learning the inside out pieces of what it means to be an HR employee and how to be a people leader. And at the time, I was an operations leader, and I enjoyed the idea of striving to accomplish those metrics. And you have this department that you run typically, or this team that you're in charge of. But the truth is that the more you dig into what it means to be an operations leader, the more you're going to understand that you have to have people skills, and you have to be able to understand what your team needs in order to motivate them and move them toward whatever that outcome is you want them to achieve. And the more that I explored that, the more I realized that I wanted to impact that. And when I got my master's degree, I got it in executive leadership because I wanted to be able to find a way to take that leadership and that language of people care and elevate it to lead the organization wide, and to be able to impact across all the different departments and to elevate the game, basically the work day to day of the operations managers, because those frontline leaders and middle management leaders have so much people work that they have to do, but yet they also have to meet their operational outcomes. So how do we equip them to do that? And I think that that has really been, it's a labor of love for people that work in the people realm, but it's so rewarding. And even though I'm not an astronaut, I really feel like I get to reach those outer limits and help people soar.
In our previous conversation, you said people work is not easy work, but it's important work. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
needs to be encouraged along the way sometimes, and seeing yourself in somebody else or hearing something that lifts your spirits goes a long way. And as I get a little bit older, I start thinking about leverage. And when I think about leverage, I used to think about me as an operator of my business was if I do the tasks correctly, then I'll be able to create leverage in my business to provide more value for people. But as I've gotten older, I start recognizing that the human element of leadership, being able to have those people skills, is really the highest leverage or highest level of leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about the biggest businesses, CEOs of, like Amazon, Jeff Bezos, they're not always talking about operations and technology. They're talking about bringing the best people into the team to get the results that come on the other side of that. And I feel like your emphasis of really kind of being in the operations space and being in the weeds, if you will, of getting all the tasks done, and then realizing that your higher leverage opportunity was how you can impact people around you, is just such a beautiful story. I
Thank
want to
you.
use that as kind of a segment to talk about the shift, if you will, that we've seen in a post-pandemic world when it comes to, I would say, how people approach work. Because it seems like before the pandemic, a lot of people were living to work, especially in previous generations. But it seems like today people are working to live. Why do you think that gigantic shift has occurred? And what are some of the, I would say, secondary compounding effects that we see kind of in our businesses today because of that approach with work?
Mm. That's a great question. I think a lot of people honestly thought that by 2024 that we wouldn't be talking about the pandemic anymore. I don't think anybody realized that the impact it was going to have. The way that I liken the experience of the pre and post pandemic workforce and organizational experience, I look at it through a personal lens. When I was in my mid 20s, I lost my father to cancer. And I distinctly remember sort of a pre and post loss, Amanda, and thinking through before that experience, I had this idea that time was infinite, and I never thought about death or anything that was negative. I always thought, the sky's the limit. I can achieve anything. And where I am now is where I am, and it'll be great until I'm not there anymore. And then I'll move on to the next great experience. And when you introduce something that is life changing, there is a pre and a post, who you are after that. And it doesn't mean that it's bad, it's just different. And so I think that that experience for me is the same as for a lot of people it was when the pandemic happened. They had a different view and they experienced something that they'd never experienced before and that you can't really prepare for in any kind of adequate way, emotionally or psychologically. And there is a post pandemic mindset. A lot of people walk through job loss. They walk through serious health issues, loss of loved ones. Some people lost their businesses. And so the mind of the worker and the organizational leader has had to change post pandemic. So when I sit down with the team and I talk about what do we do with that? Because lamenting the past, you know, recognizing what you experienced is important, but continuously lamenting that isn't going to help you solve the problems of today or lead towards solutions for tomorrow. So what do we do with that? And I think that a lot of organizations have struggled because those senior leaders or the leaders that are running them, they're not necessarily the younger employees. They've been around for a while, and we are a product of our generations often and of our upbringings. And so you have those work experience of kind of yesteryear. And I straddle that line. I'm in my mid 40s. And so I know, and I've seen you come to work, you do your job, it is what it is. You get what you get, you don't throw a fit. And then I've also seen and experienced what it's like to have different needs and to live in a post-pandemic world. And how do you, sort of minister to or care for a workforce that is dealing with that? So I think a lot of organizations have had to change their tactics. And for a lot of them, when the pandemic hit, they they had to knock on the door of their HR department. And I imagine there was a lot of operational leaders that had never been to that area of the organization. A lot of times HR has been off site. They're in the basement, they're in the broom closet, so to speak. And it's kind of like a dusty old book that you have to blow off the dust to say, gee, what's in this thing and how can it, what can I learn from it? So I think it's been good that from that difficult time, different relationships have begun to evolve with operations leaders and executives of realizing, hey, I need to partner in a different way with my people leaders in order to meet the needs of my organization. And if you look online, there's fewer job asks for generalists and more job asks for business partners, people that want to connect with their HR leaders in order to better understand their workforce and to make different decisions. And I think that that's led to a lot of growth and opportunity and hopefully a lot of benefit for the workforce of what's coming.
Let's talk about that shift from being a generalist to being an HR business partner, a strategic thought leader, but also having a seat at the table. Because I have this conversation a lot on the podcast where we talk about the strategic shifts that have occurred. And it seems like the HR role in itself is so much more important today than it's ever been. And maybe the catalyst of that was the pandemic, but more importantly, kind of thinking about the future of work. It seems like the new generation of workers, and I'm not talking about millennials or Gen Z, everybody on this other side of the pandemic has expectations to be seen, heard, and validated. And the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish those things is through the human connection. So why do you think so many organizations, you kind of just touched on it, but are now emphasizing the people element of their business so much more in a post-pandemic world compared to where we were in the past? Because I know you've been in the space for a long time, so you've been seeing these changes occur. But it's so interesting that the catalyst of the pandemic was something that really kind of emphasized this kind of stuff.
I think that the organizational leaders really have an opportunity to listen to what the employees are saying now post-pandemic. I think that what they're looking for is, like you said, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And organizational leaders in the past, I'm not saying they didn't care, they just cared in a different way, and they've had to evolve what that care looks like. And so the people that are working for companies now are asking for different things and setting different expectations because of what they've experienced. And it really has been a journey for the operational leaders to morph what they're doing. So a lot of what that means is you have to dust off those soft skills. And we tell our employees now, and the teachings that I've done at local schools, I've shared with them, you get your job through your hard skills, but you keep your job through your soft skills. And that's true of organizations too. You might grab an employee because of what you've advertised for the skill set that they have, but the way that you're going to keep an employee is through how you engage with them. And that's going to be a wide variety of things that your business partner can help you understand. It's not just your I-9s. It's not just filling out your check boxes for payroll or for your benefits. Those are all important systems, and generalists play a pivotal role in that. But on the business partner side of things, the ask now is, what else? And I don't know if there was always permission for people to ask what else, but now they care about hearing that because it matters to them in a different way, especially post-pandemic. So there's asks about, what does my learning and my career development look like? How are you going to keep my skills sharp? what does my flexibility in my schedule look like? How do I meet the needs of my family when my rate of pay needs to be adjusted? How do I communicate that? And what platform is there to share my feedback and my ideas? And when you are a business partner, you get to pull back a little bit and look more holistically at the whole picture of your employees to say, what is it that they're asking for? And what are we hearing? And what do we have? And what do we need to build in order to make that happen? And so it's been a really cool evolution because you have those great foundational skills of HR that are always necessary to make companies run, systems and processes function. But you also get to look at the whole person and create systems. And that's a beautiful thing. When you see an HR business partner role, when you see an executive at the table asking good questions and listening, that creates a really fulfilling work experience for the people leaders that are those business partners, and that cascades to the organization. It's a great benefit.
I mean, it's an amazing time to be in this space. I want to kind of pick your brain on the idea because I hear from a lot of older generational leaders that today's generation of workforce seems to be entitled because they want all the things that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of approach that I would say, older mindset about, employees being entitled because of their expectations of what they're going to receive at work?
That is an interesting topic. It spans a lot of different things. The most things I hear about are related to salary and or opportunity. And I think that helping people, there's two sides of that coin. One of them is helping the employees understand what's actually involved in a part of it, whatever it is that they're seeking. So let's say it's a different position. Why does that position need X number of years of experience or X number of skills or the amount of project work that it needs in order to take the role? Sometimes they don't really understand why that's necessary because they might not have the skills or the experience to draw from. And so explaining the why is important. A lot of the time the approach has been historically just because. That's just how it is. And that doesn't do anything for anybody. If you explain the why, it's going to help people understand a little bit better, and it's going to diminish that sense of, well, why can't I have the role? I know I'm brand new, but why can't I? And just help people understand. The other piece is to evaluate what are these role expectations built around. Is it real what you're asking? Is it really necessary? Do you really need that many years of experience? Do you really need someone to have that project management background or whatever the skill is that has always been the way that it is? And that's, I think, the downfall, whether it's always been this salary grid, it's always been this benefit level, it's always been this job description, that's just the way we do it, is a poison pill, I think, for organizations if they really want to capture talent, particularly younger talent, because the state of society now is there's so many great things at people's fingertips. They can self-teach, they can learn many things and experience things that 50 years ago we didn't have the ability to experience. And so they have a lot more in front of them that they can join an organization with, and I think that excites them. And I'm always comfortable with the ask, and I feel like if you shut down the ask from your employees, then you start to shut down the potential of your organization. People should be able to ask if they can apply for a role. They should be able to see it. They should be considered for things and be given the opportunities. So I don't know that it's entitlement. I feel like it's optimism. And I think you have to change your word and how you think of it, because this generation, I think the news will tell us something different, but I think this is probably one of the most optimistic generations that we've seen. They believe in themselves. They believe in the people around them. They want to see things improve, and they want to have something to do with that improvement. And for me, when I look at it as optimism, I think, good for you. Let's have a conversation about it. And if it's a real need, I'll explain to you if there's a real reason why you might not be the right fit or it might not be the right time yet. But I'll also talk with you about how I'm going to help you get there and what that looks like for you next. Because that's one of the things that I tell my people a lot, from brand new employees on. Not everybody's going to stay at your organization. Not everybody's going to stay at Chick-fil-A for their whole lives. There's going to be people that have that be their lifelong career, and that's awesome. But a lot of people are going to move on. And so, number one, don't try to make people feel bad about asking for what they need and viewing it as entitlement. receive it and partner with them as long as they're on that path with you, as long as their journey is aligned with yours and your organization's, build into them and remove barriers for them so that their ambitions can be achieved. And more than likely, while you do that, they'll be with your organization longer and have fonder memories and leave as someone who can still promote your brand, even if it doesn't align with their personal journey anymore. So it's really how you frame it up. And I think that what's interesting, and I might get myself in trouble for this one, is I would say that if an individual is not willing to look at it and change those words and how they evaluate that entitlement, then they're the ones that might be a little bit entitled to thinking that only X can happen or only they can determine something, when in fact, I don't know that that's usually the case.
I feel like a lot of what we're talking about here is that word of entitlement seems to be, easily tossed around from previous generations. But what it's really rooted in is a sense of judgment. And that judgment comes from really not understanding the full scenarios, that the optionality that this younger generation has. Like you said, there's opportunities to self-teach, there's opportunities to go get remote jobs, there's opportunities to do so many things. And so when we look at that from a judgment lens of you're entitled, I just feel like we totally don't understand the situation. I also
Mm-hmm.
want to double click a little bit onto the word optimistic and optimism, because I love that. I've been messing around with the term a lot in my head lately called practical optimism. So, practical optimism in my situation is because I'm an entrepreneur, I have a lot of stuff that happens every single day that's outside of my control, but I can
Mm-hmm.
control how I react to certain situations with an attitude of optimism. And I call that practical optimism. I'm not talking about toxic positivity, which a lot of people love to throw out in the world. And I'm not sure why we want to kind of get into that space. But I want to know what your 2 cents is on the word of practical optimism. And do you kind of resonate with the idea of being able to control your destiny by reacting in times of hardship with a mindset of optimism and knowing
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to kind of have the confidence to get through this situation?
Mm. I think that um, practical optimism is a great pairing because, like you said, it avoids the toxic positivity, but it also lets you read the room. Um, when you're a leader, even if you're leading a small business, when we talk about truth, we have to evaluate like what is, like where are we at? What is, how much money is in the bank? How many employees do we need? What is our retention at? Where are we going to? So it's important to be practical, but it's also important to build your strategic plans and look towards what's next with optimism, because you will stifle yourself in your organization and you will defeat yourself before you get started if you don't incorporate optimism into what you're building and what you're doing. Accept where you're at and craft a plan to move forward. And as an entrepreneur, I think it's super important, and this applies a lot to the small business owners for Chick-fil-A as well. There's so many hats that you have to wear when you run a small business, and if you're a small department for a people leader, there's a lot of HR departments of one or a few. It still astounds me to this day how many companies there are that are big companies that have relatively small people departments. And that means that those individuals have to wear a lot of hats. And some days that's tough. And so, how do you deal with where I'm at and then take that lens of optimism and say, what does a solution look like that's going to solve this and propel me toward tomorrow, towards whatever's in the future? And so it's important to pair those two things together, because if everything is only optimism and there's no practicality with it, you're going to be lopsided. And great choices and great leadership is about balance.
I was having a conversation with an HR leader from a hospital system here yesterday in Las Vegas, and we were talking about the role that technology plays in helping her meet some of her expansion goals. She said, I came onto this team and I was overseeing 600 people in the beginning. Now I oversee like 1,200 individuals, but my team hasn't grown at all. And so she was looking at
Mm-hmm.
technology like AI as an example of helping her be an accelerator so she can do the more humanistic centric work that's
Mm-hmm.
needed to support her team. And she said something really cool. And I want to bring this into kind of, this conversation. She said, HR, especially in healthcare, is like HR on steroids, and you have to love the drug. And I want to kind of hear your 2 cents on what role does technology play kind of in the future of your HR lens? Because there's a lot of conversations about AI and other tools like that right now. But we realize in order to meet our goals, we have to be people-centric first. And I wonder how you're kind of framing technology like AI in the future of helping you do more humanistic centric work that helps support your team better rather than doing redundant tasks and things like that.
Mm-hmm. What a great way for her to say that. That's super interesting for a soundbite. I think that a lot of HR is, I think a lot of HR professionals have a nervousness, a little bit of a fear about tech. I had a meeting last month with an individual that runs a huge organization here in Kansas City. And he talked about how he cannot get his HR department to move digital, let alone to look at what's coming for digital, and how that has really bottlenecked his ability to accomplish what he needs to as a program officer. And I think that it's difficult to move from what you know to be true. There's a lot of staples in HR that have always been, like, we always have the I-9, we've always got these, the ATS and the different types of workforce solutions that we use for our HRIS. And I think that we get into this rut of what's known and we get comfortable with that. We're back to that comfort. But really embracing tech has been huge for Chick-fil-A as a brand. And I think is really important on the people side. The reason I bring up the brand side is because, again, even though as people leaders, we're not talking about having to do the operations management, you have to partner with the operations managers. So you need to understand what they're up against, because or what they're integrating for their jobs, in order to understand the type of people they need, how to equip those people. For me, I have an arm of what I do that's also training and development. And so it isn't just that people side in the traditional sense. I have to evaluate how are we equipping the teams that are working in operations for success. And so when you work for an organization like Chick-fil-A that is constantly thinking forward, they're building what's next. That was huge for us in the pandemic. Our tech teams built out this phenomenal app, and it was before DoorDash and Uber Eats and Grubhub were huge. People were like, I'm not having people deliver food to my door. Are you insane? But we thought forward towards the future, because great leaders see the future. And we built this app, and it carried us and it allowed us to have this, 20% sales growth during the pandemic. That was unheard of for a lot of people that were closing their doors. So embracing tech and understanding what's happening on the operational side is really important. And then you have to build the type of programs on the people side that are going to help support that. And in order to do that, you have to also leverage the tech on the HR side. So for me, I use a lot of AI analysis on what comes in the door for applications and the content that's sent to me, so that I can get nice snapshots and synopsis without having to spend every minute evaluating every sheet of paper myself. And it has opened up the door for me to have more one-on-one time with my team and more one-on-one conversations with outside community people that we work with. So I know it's hard for people leaders to envision that sometimes. And there's such a wide span of experience on the people side. But I promise it's not as scary as you think it is. And it actually does help you do more of where your heart is at, I think, which is connecting with human beings.
Yeah, I mean, technology in itself has to be positioned. We have to have the sense of curiosity to position technology as an accelerator that helps us do the things that are most impactful. And that means having one-on-one conversations, having that human connection, which is never going to be replaceable by AI, from my 2 cents, because we're always going to long for that human connection.
Yes.
I want to use the last couple seconds here of the podcast to give you an opportunity to talk about what is the future of people and culture look like in Chick-fil-A. Let's say in the next 5 years, what type of things, as we're thinking forward, are you kind of, noodling on as we sit here in 2024 at the time of recording this?
So one of the things that you've probably seen for Chick-fil-A has been our expansion into new types of service delivery. It's been in the news lately of some different types of stores launched in New York. And I think for us, what we're exploring is very true to who we are at our core, is how do we stay connected and also give people what they need? And Chick-fil-A, the future is always, not just for Chick-fil-A, but for all organizations, typically, what's faster, what's more convenient, what do the people want, and on the food service side, we want something that tastes great and is worth the investment of your dollar. That's very hard earned. And we also have to figure out how to deliver that with care and incredible, remarkable hospitality. And so for us, that's where we're always examining is how do you move forward on the tech side? How do you build what's next and still stay connected to your team and the guest in the way that is really what the basic of human connection is. So we have a lot of conversations, but mostly it's listening to our guests. We do customer engagement monitors and we ask them, what they need and what their experience is. And we take that feedback and integrate it into what we build and how we connect with them in person. So I think for Chick-fil-A, we know what we're good at. We know that we have figured out the secret sauce. And it's not Chick-fil-A sauce, even though a lot of people think it is. It's our people. And that knowing that knowledge and having that as our foundation is the key to our success because everything can be built around it. There's a lot of great chicken sandwiches out there. You can go a lot of different places and get something really tasty, but you can't go everywhere and get the same experience on the people side that Chick-fil-A provides. And that's what we want to cling to and integrate into what we're building for the future. No matter how fast it is, no matter what the change might look like in the service delivery model, we know that our people make the difference for the guest.
I mean, it's just it's so amazing to be able to sit across this digital table with you and kind of hear about, the emphasis of the human connection. And like you talked about, the emphasis of just being a good person and being an organization that cares. Mm-hmm. It continues to pay tenfold for you guys in the communities that you serve. And I'm just so glad that we could actually share this time together, Amanda. It's been an absolute blessing. I want to use the last couple seconds here to give you the opportunity to pose a question for our next guest. Mm-hmm. So what do you got for us, Amanda?
Well, I'm going to give a momentary lead in with the last couple minutes that I have and just say that for me, a great rule of thumb in the people side is to make sure whatever I do has clarity, consistency, and care. And so that's my question to the HR leaders. When was the last time that you asked your team or the leaders in your organization, how are we doing with providing clarity, consistency, and care for our team? And are you listening to the answers? And what are you going to do with them?
Well, I think that's an amazing foot for us to be able to end on. Once again, Amanda, thank you so much for coming on the HR Heroes podcast. You are the true definition of an HR hero, and it's been an absolute blast being able to share this time with you. Thank you so much.
I had a great time. I wish you all the best of luck. I hope we talk again soon.